My name is Marcus. About 2 years ago, I was involved in a pretty nasty car accident that left me with a shattered collarbone and a completely torn rotator cuff in my right shoulder. Because of the severity of the damage, the reconstructive surgery was brutal. I'm not going to bore you with all the agonizing medical details about my recovery, but there is one thing you need to know for this story to make sense. For whatever reason, the pain I was experiencing during those first few weeks was so intense that I couldn't sleep through the night without my pain medication wearing off. I developed this awful system where I had to set an alarm to wake myself up every 4 hours just to swallow another pill. It was miserable, but it was the only thing I could do to prevent this deep, burning ache that would quite literally have me in tears. It should go without saying that my sleep schedule was downright awful during that period. My body started getting used to these weird 4 hour cycles of fragmented sleep, followed by periods of just staring at the ceiling in a total daze. That was honestly the worst part. I didn't even feel human after a while. It was like I had become some sort of zombie, constantly waking up and passing back out. One night, during the second week of my recovery, I was up at around 3:30 a.m. to take my meds again. For whatever reason, I just couldn't fall back asleep afterward. It was the middle of July in Pennsylvania, and the humidity was suffocating. Our central AC was struggling to keep up, and my room felt like a sauna. I remember tossing and turning for like 20 minutes, trying to protect my bad shoulder before deciding I had to do something about the heat. The only thing I could think of was to crack my bedroom window to let some air in. That helped a little bit, but I still couldn't sleep. So there I was, lying miserably in bed, praying with every fiber of my being that I would just drift off. But of course, I didn't. At one point, I started picking up on a strange noise coming from outside. I never usually slept with my window open, so at first I figured it was just some normal, ambient, outdoor sound I wasn't used to hearing. But the more I listened, the more I got the feeling that it wasn't normal at all. It sounded almost like a heavy rhythmic dragging, followed by scratching, as if a large animal was pulling its weight across the abrasive asphalt shingles. Eventually, the noise got louder, and I realized it was coming from directly above me, from the roof over my bedroom. Then, a few seconds later, the sound slowly started moving toward the back of the house, gradually fading out of earshot. At that point, I was positive it was some kind of large critter messing around up there. My property backs right up to a dense stretch of state game lands, so we've had our fair share of curious raccoons and opossums trying to nest where they shouldn't. I really wanted to just ignore it and go back to sleep. But my older brother, David, had taken time off work to stay with me and help me recover. I knew he would be livid if some animal chewed a hole into the attic and caused thousands of dollars in water damage. Plus, it wasn't like I was on the brink of falling asleep anyway. I was wide awake. So without much thought, I threw my covers off, grabbed my dad's old heavy-duty mag light from my nightstand, and walked out of my room. My bedroom sits on the first floor near the back patio where the roof slopes down the lowest. So I figured I'd step out the back door and check that area first. I made it out onto the concrete patio, stepped onto the grass, and started sweeping the thick flashlight beam back and forth across the roof. I didn't see anything up there, so I sighed, figuring the animal had crawled to the other side of the house in the time it took me to get outside. I started walking around the perimeter, trying my best to illuminate as much of the shingles as possible. All I really needed to do was shine the light on the thing and scare it away, which would be pretty easy if I could just find it. I was scanning the area near the chimney where the roof peaks the highest when I spotted something shift in the upper corner of my flashlight beam. With one quick flick of my wrist, I centered the light directly on the spot I had seen movement, and my heart completely stopped. There, crouching on the sharp incline of my roof, was a person. Not an animal, not a raccoon, a full-grown human being. It was a tall, incredibly gaunt man wearing nothing but a pair of filthy, shredded jeans. He was barefoot, caked in mud, completely frozen in the beam of my flashlight. I yelled out. I couldn't help it, and as soon as I did, the man on the roof started moving. It was almost like he was allergic to the light of my flashlight. He scrambled backward on all fours, moving with this absurd, unnatural speed that didn't even seem humanly possible, especially barefoot on the loose shingles of a slanted roof. He started making his way toward the edge of the roof, right above the patio, and I scrambled backward to keep him in the light. I don't even know what I was thinking. I should have just run back inside and locked the door, but some deep primal instinct in me just kept me rooted to the grass, shining the light on him. I screamed for my brother David at the top of my lungs, hoping he would wake up and get outside in time to help me ward off this absolute psycho. I backed up just in time to see the man stand up straight on the edge of the gutter and prepare to jump. My first thought was that there was no way. It was a second-story drop onto solid brick pavers. There was absolutely no way a person could make that jump without shattering both of their legs. Surely he was just trying to intimidate me and would find another way down. But without a single second of hesitation, the man leapt. He slammed into the brick patio with a sickening, deafening thud. The sheer shock of it had me entirely paralyzed. I couldn't even process how insane it was that someone had just plummeted from a second-story roof and didn't immediately shatter every bone beneath his waist. My dazed shock only lasted a split second, but that was enough. The man instantly popped up off the brick pavers like a coiled spring and charged toward me, tackling me hard into the wet grass. He started wildly clawing at my face and neck, his filthy fingernails digging into my skin. I screamed and kicked, trying to protect my surgical shoulder, but I was so weak from the medications and I just couldn't get him off me. He was grunting and spitting, and there was no logical explanation for how someone so emaciated could possess that kind of terrifying strength. I felt blood starting to drip down my neck, and in that moment, I genuinely thought I was going to die right there in my own backyard. But then, over the sound of my own screaming, I heard the back patio door violently burst open. Seconds later, my brother David was physically ripping the guy off of me, screaming curses at him like it was life or death. I scrambled up off the ground just in time to see the gaunt man break free from David's grip. But instead of continuing to attack us, the guy just turned, sprinted to the edge of our yard, effortlessly scaled our 6-foot wooden privacy fence, and disappeared into the pitch-black tree line. David and I just stood there in the grass, panting in pure shock, listening to the sounds of his barefoot steps crashing through the forest until they completely faded into the distance. I'll fast forward through the rest. David rushed me to the ER that night. I was bleeding pretty badly from the scratches on my neck and face. The doctors had to give me tetanus shots and a heavy round of antibiotics to prevent any nasty infections that feral guy might have been carrying. It was an absolute nightmare. The one saving grace was that my shoulder had somehow survived the struggle, so the reconstructive work didn't need to be redone. The police were totally useless, not like they could have done much anyway. They said searching the game lands in the pitch dark would be unfeasible, and they just chalked it up to a local meth addict having an episode. But David later went up on a ladder to check the roof. He discovered that the man hadn't just been crawling around up there. He had been aggressively trying to pry off the heavy iron grate that covered our attic ventilation fan, digging at it with his bare hands like a wild animal. Ironically, it wasn't me who was the most affected by it. It was David. He had gotten a much closer look at the guy's face when he pulled him off me, and to this day, he refuses to talk about what he saw. He was the one who spent thousands of dollars to install high-end security cameras all around my property before he went back home. I still have no logical explanation for what happened that night. Who that guy was, how he survived that fall, and why he was trying to tear his way into my attic like a starved animal are just a few of the 1,000 questions about that humid July night that I fear will never be answered. My fiancée Chloe and I recently bought our first house. It's an old, somewhat run-down mid-century property in the Pacific Northwest. We loved it because it had a lot of character, but it has a very strange architectural layout. Most houses have a standard front porch or a patio. Our house, however, has this massive enclosed sunroom that essentially wraps around the entire front and right side of the property. It was added on sometime in the late 70s by the previous owners. To get to our actual front door, you have to unlock the exterior glass door of the sunroom, walk through this long, greenhouse-like hallway, and then you reach the main door to the house. Because of this weird addition, the master bedroom on the first floor doesn't have a window that looks outside into the yard. Instead, our bedroom window looks directly into the enclosed sunroom. If I open my bedroom blinds, I am literally looking into another room of my own house. All of our friends who came over to help us paint mentioned how creepy it was, like looking into a fish tank. I mostly just brushed it off, usually keeping the heavy blackout curtains pulled shut anyway. What I'm about to tell you happened just a few months ago, right after we first moved in. We had spent the entire weekend ripping up old carpet and painting the living room, so by Sunday night, we were absolutely dead on our feet. We ordered a pizza, drank a couple of beers on the couch, and crashed in bed by 10 p.m. Sometime around 1 a.m., I woke up to a loud, clattering crash coming from outside. It sounded like heavy plastic hitting the pavement, followed by the rolling of glass bottles. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and listened. I could hear things lightly shuffling around in the side alleyway next to the garage. Chloe is a very heavy sleeper, so she didn't even stir. I gently slid out of bed, figuring it was just a raccoon or a stray neighborhood dog that had knocked over our tall recycling bins. I hadn't secured the lids properly, so it was completely my fault. Still, hearing things rummaging around in your side yard in the dead of night is always a little unsettling when you've just moved into a new neighborhood. I didn't want the wind to blow our trash all over the street, so I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked out the back door in my sweatpants. The night air was freezing. I walked around to the side of the garage, and sure enough, both of our large recycling bins were tipped over, spilling crushed cardboard and glass bottles across the concrete. I shined my phone light around the alley, expecting to see a pair of glowing animal eyes staring back at me, but it was completely empty. I sighed, righted the bins, tossed the trash back inside, and made sure the heavy plastic latch was secured this time. I walked back inside, locked the back door, double-checked the deadbolt, and quietly slipped back into bed. Chloe was still dead asleep. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, closed my eyes, and waited for sleep to take over again. I was right in that heavy, hazy stage between being awake and unconscious, where your mind starts making up weird, abstract thoughts when a new sound pulled me out of it. It was a slow, wet, squeaking sound, like bare flesh rubbing tightly against glass. My blood ran completely cold. It wasn't coming from outside the house, it was coming from right next to my bed. It was coming from the bedroom window that looked out into the enclosed sunroom. I froze. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the house settling, or a weird draft causing the glass pane to shift in its old wooden frame. But then the sound happened again. A long, deliberate squeak, traveling down the length of the glass. I held my breath, slowly sat up, and looked at the heavy blackout curtains covering the window. Very carefully, I reached out, grabbed the edge of the fabric, and peeled it back just a fraction of an inch to peek into the sunroom. The sunroom was cast in this dim, dark blue light from the street lamp outside. But standing right in the middle of the room, facing the exterior door, was a tall, lanky silhouette. Someone was inside our sunroom. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my ribcage. It was a man wearing a bulky, oversized winter coat. He had his back to me, just standing completely motionless in the dark, staring at the front door. I dropped the curtain and ducked down beside the bed, my hands shaking violently. My mind went totally blank. It's a paralyzing, suffocating kind of terror when you realize there is a stranger standing just inches away from you, separated only by a thin pane of interior glass. I knelt there on the floor for what felt like an eternity, terrified that the sudden movement of the curtain had tipped him off. I couldn't hear him walking. I couldn't hear the squeaking sound anymore. The house was dead silent. I thought maybe he had quietly slipped back out the front door. I needed to know if he was gone before I woke Chloe up and caused a panic. Taking a deep, silent breath, I slowly stood back up. I brought my face close to the glass and pulled the edge of the curtain back just a sliver. I instantly regretted it. The man wasn't standing in the middle of the room anymore. He was standing right at the window. His face was pressed flat against the glass, mere inches from mine. His skin was sickeningly pale and greasy, and his eyes were completely wide and unblinking, staring straight through the gap in the curtains directly into my eyes. He had this horrific, unnatural, toothy grin plastered across his face, like he had been waiting for me to look back. I let out a visceral, panicked scream and scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet and crashing into the nightstand. Chloe jolted awake, screaming, asking what was going on. I didn't even answer her. I just grabbed my phone, slammed the bedroom door shut, and dragged her into the master bathroom, locking that door too. I dialed 911, babbling to the dispatcher that there was an intruder in our house. The cops arrived about 8 minutes later. We stayed locked in the bathroom until we heard them announce themselves in the living room. When I finally came out, my hands were still shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I brought the officers to the sunroom and told them exactly what I saw. They drew their flashlights and swept the entire perimeter, checking the sunroom, the yard, and the alleyway. But they didn't find anyone. What was even more disturbing was that the exterior glass door leading into the sunroom was still completely locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass, no jimmy marks on the lock, nothing. The officers tried to be polite, but I could tell they thought I was just a stressed-out new homeowner who had a bad dream or got spooked by a shadow. They told us to make sure our doors were locked, gave us a card, and left. Chloe tried to comfort me, telling me that maybe in my half-asleep state, my mind had just played a trick on me. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I convinced myself for a few days that it must have been a sleep paralysis hallucination, but I'm writing this now because of what I found yesterday morning. I was walking through the sunroom to check the mail, the morning sunlight shining brightly through the windows. As I walked past our bedroom window, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, near the top of the glass pane, completely illuminated by the morning sun, was a greasy, smeared handprint. And right next to it, the unmistakable oily smudge of a human face pressed against the glass. I didn't imagine it. That guy was real. And the only reason I am sharing this story is because if the exterior sunroom door was locked from the inside that night, it means whoever that man was didn't break in. It means he already had a key, or worse, he never left. What you're about to hear is an experience that nearly made me lose my grip on reality. It's still something that keeps me up at night, if I'm being completely honest, but I've been able to recover a bit in the months since it happened. I'll get right into it. My name is Sarah. I'm a single woman in my late 20s, and I live alone with no pets in a small, single-story ranch house in a quiet suburb in Ohio. The house is very modest: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen, and a narrow hallway connecting it all. That's it. Life is usually pretty peaceful. Because I work as a freelance video editor, I set my own hours and don't really have to answer to a boss, a boyfriend, or a rigid corporate schedule. Freedom has always been a huge priority for me, so I've structured my life to maximize it. The excess freedom is definitely tethered to its own set of drawbacks, though. Mostly my sleep schedule. It is absolutely god-awful. For some reason, I am insanely productive at the latest hours of the night. I often find myself staying up until dawn, rendering videos and editing audio, and then sleeping until 2 p.m. It's just how my brain functions, and since I live alone, I've never seen a reason to change it. I was up really late one night this past November. I'm talking past 4 a.m. late. I was sitting at the desk in my spare bedroom, which I use as my office, trying to finish a project on a tight deadline. I was completely in the zone. I had taken my noise-canceling headphones off about an hour prior to give my ears a rest, so the house was just dead silent. Imagine yourself at peak hours of focus. That's the kind of groove I was in. The room was pitch black except for the glow of my dual monitors, and I was utterly alone with the sound of my mouse clicking and my own thoughts. And then, bam! Out of nowhere, the dead silence of my house was violently shattered. It was the sound of heavy, hard-soled boots literally sprinting across the hardwood floor of my living room. They were pounding down the narrow hallway, coming directly toward my closed office door. Before my brain could even process what was happening, whoever it was slammed into my door. 3 deafening, violent strikes against the wood, followed by the doorknob being aggressively rattled back and forth as if someone was trying to rip the handle straight off the mechanism. I shot up from my desk chair so fast that I knocked my half-empty mug of cold coffee completely over, spilling it all over my keyboard. I was just so shocked. It caught me completely off guard. Just imagine being in your own house at 4 a.m. in complete and utter silence, and suddenly someone is sprinting down your hall and trying to bash your door in like a police raid. It was, and still is, the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Standing up was a pure involuntary reaction. After that, I was completely frozen. I kept my eyes fixated on the office door, my heart hammering against my ribs, dreading the moment I knew was coming. I was waiting for the wood to splinter. I was waiting for the door to burst open and for me to have to fight a complete stranger in the dark. But it never came. The rattling stopped. I didn't hear anything else. Not heavy breathing, not clothes rustling, nothing. It was almost like I had imagined it or had some sort of waking nightmare. But I was 100% positive I hadn't. I don't know how long I stood there gripping the edge of my desk, but I physically could not force my legs to move. It was like sleep paralysis, except I was wide awake and standing up. And then finally the silence broke again. I heard the heavy boots slowly and deliberately walking backward down the hall, retreating toward the kitchen. Someone was in my house. I don't know why, but hearing those footsteps retreat completely unlocked my brain. Fight or flight kicked in, and for some reason I chose fight. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy, solid brass letter opener off my desk, ripped my office door open, and started chasing after whoever had broken into my home. I didn't even try to be quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like an absolute lunatic, hoping the sheer volume would give me the adrenaline I needed and maybe intimidate whoever was in my kitchen. I flipped on every light switch I passed. I ran through the living room, the kitchen, the laundry room, screaming the whole time. But I didn't find anyone. My house isn't big. There are only a handful of places a grown man could hide. But even after checking every single closet, looking behind the couch, and checking the shower, the house was completely empty. My bout of manic confidence completely drained right then and there, and the cold, suffocating dread flooded back in. I sprinted back into my office, locked the door, and called 911. In the 8 minutes it took the police to arrive, I sat on the floor in the dark, clutching the letter opener, listening to the dead silence of the house. I never heard another sound. When the cops showed up, I let them inside and explained everything, hyperventilating. 2 officers drew their weapons and did a thorough, tactical sweep of the entire house, the attic, and the backyard. They found absolutely nothing. But the detail that almost made me lose my mind was when the officers checked the entryways. Both the front door and the back door were deadbolted from the inside. All the windows were locked and completely undisturbed. One of the officers tried to gently suggest that I had probably just fallen asleep at my desk and had a highly realistic night terror. They see it all the time with people who work late hours. It took everything in me not to scream at him right there. I know for a factual certainty that I was wide awake. I remember the coffee spilling. I know what a heavy boot sounds like on hardwood. But because the house was locked from the inside, there was no logical way to explain how someone had gotten in, sprinted down my hall, banged on my door, and then vanished into thin air without unlocking a single deadbolt. For the next week, I was a psychological mess. My brain refused to accept that I had hallucinated something so vivid, but I couldn't conceive of a possible way it was real. I barely slept, I couldn't eat, and I couldn't work. I eventually broke my lease and moved into an apartment building on the 3rd floor. I'm doing much better now, and the passage of time has dulled the panic. But even now, sitting in my new apartment, the only logical explanation I can come up with is that the intruder had been inside my house before I even locked the doors for the night. They were already inside, waiting in the dark. And why they decided to charge my door, only to retreat and quietly escape without a trace, is a complete mystery that I will never understand.